Hello everyone and welcome to Tech with Robert, the Get Started with T-SQL course. In this lecture we're going to talk about the in and not in operator. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, give a thumbs up on the video if you like what I do. That really helps me to know what I do well and what you guys want me to improve or focus more on in the future lectures. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So we've looked at how we could do some filtering using the where clause and the and or operators. And if we say, for example, that we wanted to give customer here, we can say if we select the customer key, the first name and the last name, and we say where last name is equal to young, or the last name is equal to 1. So we already know what this does. It gives us all of the customers whose last name is young or 1. And so there's another way to write this query, and that is by using the in and not in operator. And so what if we just copy this query and so instead of writing it this way, we could say where last name, and then we'll type in, and then we have an opening and closing parenthesis. And so inside of this parenthesis we type with the same way as we do in the previous query. We type with the single quotes here, and we say where it's in young, and then we separate it with a comma, so we say and then say 1. So if we run this query, we will select all of the customers here where the last name is in the young and 1. So it's going to, in this case, do the exact same thing. Let's see, we get 188 rows here, and if we run this query, we will also get 188 rows like this. And so to very easily explain the in and not in when working with it in this way, you could say that it's like another way of using multiple or statements. So if we add, for example, here we can add Navarro. It's a lot simpler to add it in the list here in the in clause instead of using or last name is equal to Navarro. But there are essentially two ways of working with the in clause. And if you're doing some basic filtering, like if you want to retrieve some data and you want these kind of basic filtering, then doing it this way is just fine because you don't need to overcomplicate it. But there are two ways of working with the in statement, the in clause, and that is this is the first way, where you sort of you write your own list here inside of the parentheses, and you specify the values inside the parentheses here on what the filters are. But the next way of working with the in clause is by using a subquery, and we're going to talk a lot more about subqueries in upcoming lectures. I just sort of want to highlight what it is, and that really helps to understand why we need the in and not in clause. So we could write, if we just copy the query here again, we could write it and we could say where the last name in, and then instead of doing the single quotes here and specifying the values that we want to let another query retrieve the values, and we're going to use those values later on in the query. So just going to make a new space here and tab here. I like to write it this way. You can write it however you want to. You could write it like this or however you want to. I like to create a new row here and do one tab. So inside of the in statement there, inside of the parentheses, we could write what is called a subquery. So that is essentially just another SQL statement. So we could write select last name from dim customer where last name is equal to young or last name is equal to 1, like this. So if we run this query, you'll see we will also get 188 rows. We will get the exact same result, but the difference here is that the way SQL Server is going to execute and run this query is it's always going to run the inner query first, and if we have another, like if we have 5 inner queries, for example, it's going to take the fifth one, the most inner one, and then it's going to go out to this to the second one, and then the third one, fourth one, and then it's going to go outside here to the outer query, the last one. But so what this is going to do, so it's going to run this query first, and then use the result that it receives from this query and use it in the outer query here, in the where clause here, in the most outer query. So it's going to run this query like this, and you see here it selects only the last name column. So it retrieves a list here with all of the last names that are Yang or Wang, and then it applies that filter to the outer query here. So it's using that in the where clause over here. And if you just look at it like this, you would think that, but why would you want to write it like this? Isn't it a lot more complicated? Isn't it unnecessary? Why don't just, you know, specify it like this? With just it's just two simple OR statements. Why do we need to do inner subqueries and inner queries and all of that? And the simple answer for that is that using this type of way here with the where clause and the OR statements, you can apply some basic where conditions on what you want to search for in the query, and to apply some different filters. And you can be quite flexible, but there are going to be some more advanced scenarios where you want to do some more advanced queries, and we're also going to dive a lot deeper into joins later. But what if we needed to write a pretty complicated query where we needed to select something and then we needed to get values from another table and look at the different statuses on that column from another table and do some kind of advanced query and then use the results there to the outer query? That is something that we could not achieve with this simple where clause here. So we need to, so in that case we would need to write a subquery, and that subquery is going to retrieve the list that we want to work with and apply filters on in our outer query. And so an example of this could be, say that we have a business intelligence solution where we retrieve a lot of data from our CRM system, for example. And usually what we do is we connect to the source system, the CRM system, but we don't want to establish the connection and, you know, spend a lot of time there. So we just want to quickly retrieve the data, and it's very common to store that data in a staging table. So we could have, for example, stage customer. But then, since that data is raw from the source system, it's highly likely that we will need to do some basic, you know, data wrangling. We need to sort of clean up the data. For example, if in a customer form on the website, for example, they say they choose, for example, S for single or M for married, but in our reports we want to display single and married, not just S and M, for example, then we need to work and convert those values and so on. And usually we do that in the step where we load the data to another table. So if we take this example and we say staged customer, this is just the raw data. This is exactly how it looks in the source system. And then we need to do some data manipulation, data wrangling, and then we're going to store the data in the dbo.customer, for example. And let's say that we are using Power BI or Excel or whatever reporting software to query the data. We're going to query this table over here. But a way we could use in and not in is that the first time we create this table, we're going to extract all of the customers, and we're simply just going to use an insert into statement. So we're going to take all of these customers and insert them into the dbo.customer, and that is all fine. But what happens the next day? Usually we truncate this table, so we delete everything from it. So it's every day it's the empty table, and they just get everything new from the source system here, everything as it is. And so we don't want to delete everything from this table every day. We want to insert the new rows that we get each day. So for example, the first time we're going to take all of these rows here and insert them into this table. But then the next day, let's say that we have a new customer here. We don't want to delete all of these customers here just because we have one new customer. So what we can do then is using the not in method here. So it's saying that we want to insert into the dbo.customer here, the customer, in this case just the ID, and we want to select the ID from the stage customers, all of those that are not in, all of those IDs that does not exist in this table. So this inner query here in the not in statement was going to select all of the customer IDs here from the DBO customers, and then it's going to compare it with these customer IDs here from this table, and it's only going to insert where they don't already exist. It's not inside this list here. So if we look at the first row here, it's going to say, okay, this ID here, 145, it already exists in this table here, so it's not going to do anything. But then when it jumps to the second row, 146 here, it's going to say, okay, that ID does not exist in this table here, so we're going to insert that row into that table here. And if you wanted to do these sort of inserts with data, we would have to use the in or not in. We could not use a simple where clause like we did over here. So just a short recap is that when you're working with in and not in, there are essentially two ways how you can work with it. And the first way is the simple way right over here, where you just specify the values that you want to apply as filters. And then the second way is by using a subquery. And the subquery works in that way. It's going to run this query first, and then it's going to go outside and run the outer query. And the reason we need this is for more complex situations where we could not write it with a simple where and or clause like this. So I know this might be a little bit much, but don't worry, because we will cover all of these concepts and methods and way of doing things later in the course. But the purpose of this lecture was sort of just to introduce you to the in and not in statement, because they are very useful and handy, and just sort of want you to briefly introduce subqueries, because that's also a very important concept that you guys would need to learn in order to work with more complex queries. But this is it for this lecture. In the next lecture, I'm going to talk about custom columns and how we can use aliases to our columns and tables. So I will see you guys in the next lecture.